I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Wiradjuri Nation. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
I'm always guilty of getting a bit carried away. I reckon that's one of the biggest challenges for a small winery, is just trying to stay true to your narrative and your ethos.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Nick Spencer has been making wine for over 20 years. He is an extremely proud Australian winemaker who champions multiple regions throughout New South Wales. Nick's passion for Gundagai and Tumbarumba has reinvigorated the excitement around these special places, and his dedication to the entire wine industry is something to be commended. Mr. Nick Spencer, thanks for joining me.
How you going? I need to copy that bio and pop it up on my website because mine's a little bit outdated. That sounds a lot better than my one. How are you?
Oh, well, I'm really, really well. How the bloody hell are you? It's been a while since we've caught up.
Very well. I know it's been a long time. I'm in freezing cold Sydney at the moment, and it's bloody windy, as it must be down with you. But it's funny. I feel pathetic because I've sort of spent vast majority of my time in Canberra, and now I say I'm freezing in Sydney, and it's probably 15 degrees and just mild, but I'm cold.
It's all relative though, isn't it? You're acclimatized to wherever you are.
Yeah, I lived in Ottawa, in Canada for 3 years, and that got down to minus 20 or minus 30 with wind chill and was seriously cold, but I never felt cold. Whereas I reckon the two coldest places I've lived are Sydney and Canberra. In Sydney, the houses just aren't set up for cold weather. You kind of feel like you're living in tents in all the houses, and then in Canberra, it's just not cold enough to have to go out and wear gloves and beanies and big winter jackets all the time. It's just sort of, it's not freezing cold, so you're sort of not completely geared up for it.
Totally. You tend to kind of think, it's only going to be for a couple of weeks. Is it worth getting ducted air conditioning, or is it worth getting a fireplace? And yeah, so we kind of just whinge about it when it happens, but don't really do anything about it.
Precisely. Anyway.
Well, I'm glad you made the time, and hopefully you can keep warm. But let's start at the beginning, and let's hear all about young Nick Spencer and how he's found his way into the world of wine.
I had a really sort of unceremonious entry into the wine industry, in that parents weren't involved in the wine industry. There's no history at all in the family to wine, aside from drinking it. And I was interested in chemistry and agriculture and biology as subjects at school, and those are the subjects that I did reasonably well in. And I was trying to think of something to study at university, because back then you either went straight to uni. I don't know what the students do now, but you either went straight to uni or you went on a gap year to the UK. And I just wanted to go and get my 4 years of uni done and dusted. So I was trying to work out what I should study at uni. And Mum, who was a chef, sort of suggested, why don't you study winemaking? And I thought, that sounds fun and romantic and easy, and it kind of ticks all the chemistry and science and agricultural boxes. And so I just decided to enroll in winemaking down in enology, it was called, down in Adelaide. And the rest is history. I didn't drink much wine at all when I was young. I mean, we had wine at the dinner table all the time, but it was by no means, and I'm sure my parents won't ever listen to this, but it was by no means good quality wine. Like they always had a 4-litre cask of white wine in the fridge and a 4-litre cask of Morris Pressings in the pantry, and that was mostly what they drank when we were growing up. So wine wasn't really a big part of, apart from just really loving food drinking wine at the dinner table. It wasn't really a part of our family. And so I studied, and I kind of fell in love with it at the time as I was studying. And I went to uni with some really great people as well. Like I noticed you interviewed Jules Ashmead a couple of weeks ago, and I went to uni with her and a whole bunch of like Anton von Klopper and Dan Shaw, who's now up in Orange at Philip Shaw Wines or Shaw Wines. All these great guys, and had a ball of a time, and kind of just fell in love with wine then. So it wasn't there wasn't a kind of traditional entry into the wine industry for me.
Yeah, I love that though, because I think we hear lots of different stories about some people that were born into, generations and generations of winemaking. But it is so accessible for anybody that wants to get involved and is curious about it anyway. So good on you for and your mum for saying, maybe study this. It's amazing that was exactly the right path for you. And so great that, you have some of those connections still. I mean, often the people we meet at uni are the people that we kind of keep long friendships with over time because it's so fundamentally changing, I think, those years.
Yeah.
So when you left uni, where did you head off to then?
Well, I went, I came back to Canberra after uni and started working at a winery called Madew Wines, which is out at Lake George, which is now what is Lake George Winery. And I was there for a little while, and then I lined up a job to go and work at Veuve Clicquot for a vintage, and I was about to jump on a plane and go over there, and then that job fell through for some reason. I can't entirely remember the circumstances, but that job fell through, and so I was trying to look for something to do overseas, and a mate of a mate knew a mate of a mate who knew someone that was in France that was consulting to wine companies in Georgia and Eastern Europe, and I sent him an email, or I think it was an email, maybe it was letters way back then. Maybe emails didn't exist. It must have been at the very beginning of emails. And anyway, long story short, I ended up lining up a job as for want of a better description, a consultant winemaker in Georgia. So I jumped on the plane. I asked my old man whether he knew anything about the region and whether it was safe, because at the time it wasn't. This is 15 odd years ago now, maybe 20 years ago. At the time it wasn't the safest place to go, and there were lots of foreigners getting kidnapped in Georgia and around the region. And so I wasn't sure what I was getting myself into, but just jumped on a plane and flew to Tbilisi and started working with this amazing family that own this winery, big winery in Georgia, and then for the next 3 or 4 years, I think I spent time in Canberra working at Madew Wines, and then the balance of my time I'd go across to Georgia about 4 times a year. So that was an incredible experience, and interesting now that at the time when I went over there, my role was to modernise the wines and the wine styles, because they were trying to export more wines to Western Europe and to Asia, and their styles of wines weren't really in sync with what was happening in other parts of the world. And so my role was to modernise the wines, and then ironically now they've become popular, but popular with their traditional styles of wine. So it's been fascinating to watch Georgia as a country in the last, especially in the last 3 or 4 years.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the oldest wine regions of the world, and amazing that, like you said, you've been able to follow its progression and how it's changed over time. Did you take anything away from kind of what you saw over there in terms of winemaking that they were doing differently, or was it just more about you educating them on the more modern techniques of winemaking?
There's nothing really wine technique wise that I learnt over there, or But the one thing that I did learn and that I reflect on quite a bit is they're traditional styles of wines. They're skin contact white wines and they're pretty rustic red wines. But in particular, they're skin contact white wines that are made from Cazzotelli, which is a pretty phenolic grape variety. But they were, when you taste these wines out of context, they are really tough wines because they're very, very phenolic. They're grippy, they're orange. They don't have an enormous amount of aromatics. They're just these brutal, tannic white wines. And but in the context of where they're drunk in Georgia, in the little villages and towns, and the food that you drink those wines with, they are the most amazing wines, and you couldn't possibly imagine drinking anything else apart from their local chacha or vodka that they call it chacha. But so all the cuisine over there was like salty cheese, really, really ripe tomatoes that actually tasted like tomatoes, and Spanish onions and barbecued meats that have lots of salt on them and are really charry and smoky. And so if you can imagine, and then the sauces were like fermented pomegranate sauces. And so you can imagine bitter, salty, lots of flavour. And the only wine that you could ever possibly imagine drinking that with is those really tannic, skin contact, traditional white wines that they produced. And that, if I reflect on that, I think, especially now with the proliferation of natural wines, if that's what you want to call them, or minimal intervention wines, or however you kind of frame them, I think a lot of those wines are ideally drunk in the towns and villages that they're made. And sometimes we take those wines out of context and we don't drink them. Sometimes consumers don't understand those styles of wines because they're not really drinking them in the context in which they were made and with the cuisine in which they were made. So that was the main thing that I took away from there, was that it's really important to consider your environment when you're making wine. And I don't mean climatically. I mean, what's everyone eating? What's the cuisine where you're making wines, and try and sort of produce wines that reflect that a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, it really does. And I think that, like you said, we often look at wines under a microscope, fluorescent lighting, dissect it and pull it apart, and we're actually forgetting the main factors, which is life and enjoyment and company and all these other parts that really go into the experience of drinking wine. So I think you've highlighted that really well, and it is something that we should take into consideration when we're thinking about wine. You worked at Eden Road Wines for over 10 years, I think. You led the team there. If you could sum up the experience of Eden Road, what was your main takeaways from that experience?
Amazing experience, and we had a very lucky kickstart to that brand when we won the Jimmy Watson in 2009. So that was the first vintage that we produced wine from, and I was asked. Again, a mate of a mate said, do you want to get involved in this wine company that I'm starting? We just want to make, the aim is to make the best Chardonnay in the country. And I just went, righto, sign me up. And I was living in Sydney at the time, and I had to then go to Sarah, who was my partner, now wife, but partner at the time, and say, do you want to move back to Canberra because I got offered this job to work at this place, which wasn't called Eden Road at the time. But I was just hooked because the mission was to make great Chardonnay out of Tumbarumba, and I'd fallen in love with Tumbarumba beforehand. And anyway, so we moved down to Canberra. I managed to convince Sarah to move back to Canberra, and then was involved with Eden Road, and we won the Jimmy Watson in the first vintage. So that was, I had no idea what the Jimmy Watson was or what its impact may be, but it kind of was great because it just put the brand on the map, and then it just opened doors, or gave people in the industry the confidence that the brand was of some significance, and then we just for the next 10 years just had this great ride of making great wines and exploring new regions in New South Wales, like Gundagai. We started making wines out of Gundagai in 2010 was the first vintage, or 2009, 2010, I think. And that was, for me, the start of falling in love with Gundagai as a wine region. And then 10 years down the track, left Eden Road to start a brand kind of based around that wine region, because I thought it was such a untapped and exciting region. But Eden Road was fantastic because we had a great group of people working there. And if I look at where they all are now, like, Annabelle Holland's up in at First Creek, and Hamish Young, who I'm sure you're aware of, has started his own brand, Matter Wines, out of Canberra. And so we had a great crew of people working there. And we also we had owners that kind of just allowed us to do whatever we wanted. And I think that was a great thing about winning the Jimmy Watson. Was I think the people that owned the company thought, oh, these guys must know what they're doing. So it allowed us to kind of do whatever we wanted for 10 years in a winemaking respect. So that was amazing. And we kind of ended up on a vineyard near Clonakilla and Murrumbateman towards the end. But we had lots of vineyard, lots of growers in Tumbarumba and Gundagai and Hilltop. So it was my kind of entry into exploring New South Wales as a wine region.
It's so funny that I didn't realise it was the first vintage that you did at Eden Road. And just for everyone listening, if you go onto YouTube and you type in Jimmy Watson, Nick Spencer trophy in 2009, you can see this baby-faced, very candid Nick winning the award. It is such a good little video. I cracked up when I saw it. But it makes sense now. I mean, how incredible, like you just popped your heart and soul into something, and then you get, and for everyone, the Jimmy Watson Memorial Trophy is probably one of the, if not the most prestigious and sought after wine award in Australia. And to win that off the bat, like how incredible, that's just amazing. And I mean, now you just need to,
ridiculous.
You need to follow it up, right?
To legitimise it. It was ridiculous. It was amazing. But we were right place, right time, in that there was a trend kind of happening in the industry, driven by you guys as sommeliers in the trade and through wine shows, and to a style of wine that was, spicier and more savoury and more fruit forward. And so traditionally that trophy, if you look at past winners, quite often went to big, powerful South Australian wines. And then from 2009 onwards, it sort of swung the other way, where it was cool climate Shirazes, Pinot Noirs, Grenache, a Claret, Cabernet blend from WA. So really, like, we were the start of an inevitable trend towards what we're all drinking now. So it was really, I mean, it was great to win it, but we were pretty lucky that we just happened to produce a spicy, red fruited style of Shiraz that happened to appeal to all the judges on that day.
I don't think you need to talk it down. I think you very much deserve to win it. And but like you said, we have seen a change in what people want to drink, but also our appreciation for just different styles of wine. And you're right, then Pinot Noir went on to win it, and Grenache, and who knows what'll be next. And that's what's so exciting. The Jimmy Watson has kept legitimate and current over the years, which I think is fantastic. So let's talk about Nick Spencer Wines. In 2017, you launched your own label. From the offset, what were your aims of the brand, and have they changed over the years?
Yeah, they have. I just wanted the initial aim was just to produce a couple of red wines, and I was influenced by my week at the Len Evans tutorial back in 2011 when everyone that I speak to has this same experience where, well, most people I speak to, you get to taste the greatest wines in the world, but most people come away from that week going, bloody hell, we made some amazing wines back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and we make amazing wines now. But my point is, I reckon Australia was making the greatest wines in the world, and you had the opportunity to compare them to the greatest wines from Burgundy and Bordeaux in particular. And so we were tasting all these amazing clarets out of from the 60s. And I thought, why are we not producing these styles of wines anymore? We seem to have become obsessed with single varietal wines. And I love the idea that we drunk and labelled our wines according to a style back then, and we weren't so fussed about what varieties they were. It was just, we produced clarets, which were medium-bodied styles of wine, and then we produced Burgundies, which were light-bodied styles of wines, and they were usually Shiraz or Shiraz Cabernet blends in the case of clarets. But I really liked that idea that the variety that wasn't the most important part, it was the style of the wine. So after that experience, I kind of, that stewed in my head for a long time, and I thought I'd really like to start a brand that just pays homage to those old Aussie clarets and Burgundy. So I the initial idea was just to produce a medium-bodied red blend and a light-bodied red blend, and then I always had to do a Chardonnay because I love Chardonnay and had a lot of experience and history with Tumbarumba. So it was just going to be those three wines, and then someone called me up and offered me some Grüner Veltliner, and that sounded interesting. And then the rest is just history in that I now produce Rosé and Pinot Gris and a Pet Nat and a preservative-free Shiraz, and you just kind of evolve over time. But the original idea was just a Chardonnay and two reds.
I remember when you first came onto the scene, and that story really resonated with me. And I think, it is about kind of where we've been and where we go to. And I love the light dry red and the medium dry red for anything but the simple fact that they're just delicious wines. And it's not so important about the makeup, but really about how the wines drink and the conversation that they invoke when you're drinking them with, people around you. And I think that it's fantastic that you've kept that. But your brand has grown exponentially in the last few years, and it's just been such a pleasure to watch. How do you stay connected to the roots and kind of keep that essence and feeling, but continue to grow and add different varietals? I mean, is there a right way or a wrong way to do it? Is there too much growth that you think that could be dangerous, that you then lose that kind of boutique operation feeling?
Yeah. I reckon I always in the back of my mind channel brands like Shaw and Smith when I'm thinking of the next move with my brand, because you look at brands like Shaw and Smith and they were so disciplined about their branding and the wines that they made, and they just did it for such a long period of time. They still do, obviously. But I channel brands like that just to make sure, I might think, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and you're kind of a kid in a candy shop, especially when it's your own brand and you don't have anyone dictating what you need to do. You can get a little bit carried away, and you think, I might make this wine and I enjoy drinking that wine, so I might have a crack at making that wine. It's really, really difficult. And so I try and channel brands like Shaw and Smith in terms of their discipline to a really clear narrative and brand. But sometimes it is really difficult. And then you get thrown sort of, things like the bushfires in 2020, and that has an impact on the business from a financial point of view. And then you've got to think of ways to get wines back into the market quickly. So that was the kind of genesis for preservative-free Shiraz and a pet nat was I just ran out of wines from 2019, and come 2021, I needed to get wines into bottle quickly and back out into the market because I had zero wines to sell. So that, so then you start thinking, what wines can I produce that I can get out into the market that are interesting, and so you can get a little bit carried away, if that makes sense. And I'm always guilty of getting a bit carried away. I reckon that's one of the biggest challenges for a small winery, is just trying to stay true to your narrative and your ethos.
I think so. I think it must be a huge challenge. I think you've done it really well, Nick. But I mean, your phone number's on the website if people want to contact anyone about Nick Spencer wines. Your name's on the bottles. You also have a young family. How do you manage staying apart? I mean, I imagine everybody that buys your wines kind of wants a piece of you, but you do quite a few dinners around the country as well. What's the importance of kind of connecting with the people that are buying your wines?
I reckon it's the number one most important thing is, especially for a young brand. And like we moved to Sydney for that reason, that we were living in Canberra and we thought, why not move to Sydney, where I was coming up to Sydney every second week doing dinners or tastings or spending time with distributors. And we thought, why are we still in Canberra? There's nothing holding us to Canberra. I don't get any fruit from Canberra anymore. And so we moved up to Sydney just so we could be in the market and connected to the biggest market in Australia, and just made life easy, when it comes to doing dinners. I mean, for example, I'm doing a dinner tonight and tomorrow night at a restaurant in Crow's Nest, and then another dinner down towards you in Thirroul next week. And it just, when we're in Canberra, that was me travelling the whole time, and then add wine shows onto that, and it became very, very difficult. So we moved to Sydney as a method of trying to sort of be in the trade, because I don't make a huge amount of wine. I only make about 7,000 cases. It's not a big production, and I think the big challenge is selling the wine and staying connected to consumers. And I don't have a cellar door, so it's my only way of getting in front of people is hosting dinners or doing tastings, or we've got a street festival coming up in Chippendale on the weekend as well. So it's my only way of getting in front of consumers.
I think it's important because you're a huge part of your brand. You make great wine, but it's also your personality that people want to connect with. And I think that is sometimes something that's missed, I think, in the industry. I know that I've, served your wines to people at Key, and they've said, oh my gosh, we love his wines, we go to his dinners, and we had a real talking point for what they meant to people, and we connected over that. The same goes for people that just recognize your labels and say, oh, that's a gilded gold wine. Yep, I know that. And that's fantastic. So I think it's great that, it must be taxing, but I still think it's fantastic that you're out there and you're meeting people, because it really means something to them, and they'll probably stay loyal to you because of it.
Yeah. I think also wine can be a little bit intimidating, and anything that anyone can do in the industry to demystify wine is really valuable. And that's kind of, the theme when I get up and talk about my wines and wine in general is just trying to demystify it, because, geez, it's, it's a pompous industry, and I think sometimes we think it's greater than it actually is. Like, it's just a drink, and consumers should be able to understand it without feeling intimidated, and that's kind of the way I approach things when I talk about wine to consumers.
Absolutely. I mean, do you like it? Do you want to drink it? That is really essentially the most important part. All the jargon that goes with it you're right. It can get, it might be interesting to some people, but it certainly isn't to a lot. So,
yeah. And one of the things, back to talking about drinking according to a style and blends, and I think that's really, if you as a consumer have open-minded about what styles of wines you like to drink, then you open the book to what wines you can drink, as opposed to, I hear so many people just say, I just drink Pinot Noir, or I just drink Shiraz. And I wonder, like, for the Pinot Noir drinkers, do you enjoy light red wines? Is that what appeals to you about Pinot Noir? Because if it is, there's another 10 varieties and another 20-odd blends that you could drink that aren't Pinot Noir, whereas if you're obsessed or focused on a variety, it just kind of stops you from trying other great things.
Yeah, and these days, I mean, we're spoiled for choice. So if we stay with one variety, yes, there's a plethora of brands and different styles out there, but I think that, sometimes it's just about trying different wines, being open-minded. And like you said, maybe you do love Pinot, but have you tried a Pinot and Shiraz blend? There's plenty of those out there, and they'll still hit the mark, but they might just add this other facet to your drinking experience.
Yeah, or have you tried a Sangiovese? It's similar. There's this Sangiovese that's kind of similar in style, similar light, but just something slightly different than the Pinot that you love. Yeah.
You're chair of judges for the New South Wales Wine Show. How does the role that you have impact kind of your community engagement and kind of your relationship with other New South Wales brands?
It's amazing. It's a great role to have, and this will be my second year. So last year was my first year. But the New South Wales Wine Industry Association is also doing all these other tastings now that I'm involved with an aim. They're based in Sydney, but with an aim of trying to increase the amount of listings of New South Wales wines in Sydney. And I'm involved in that through the role at New South Wales Wine Awards. And so it's just great it just allows me to get involved in all the wine regions around New South Wales. And the great thing about wine shows, aside from tasting a lot of wine and seeing where the wines are at and seeing what the benchmarks are, and is also just meeting a lot of people that are involved in the wine industry, but not necessarily winemakers, but sommeliers and retailers and journalists. And so it's an amazing, I do recommend for any young winemaker coming up to try and really try hard to get involved in wine shows, because people can criticise wine shows quite a bit, but it's a great thing to be involved with, and it's a great way to meet people, and it's a great way to importantly meet people in the industry that that are important to your brand or your future brand, or it's a really good, fun, exciting. And you've obviously judged at the show for quite a few years now. But I'm sure you have an opinion on it, but it's a really great way of getting involved in the industry.
Definitely. And a great way to give back to, for your experience, to feedback information, to see New South Wales grow. And I think, like anything else, if your region, if your state, if your district's doing well, everybody does well. And the more New South Wales wines we can get out the door, the better we all are.
Yeah, and I remember having a conversation with you 3 odd years ago now, and it was after one of the New South Wales Wine Awards shows, and because I just remember having this moment where I was tasting a panel of Shiraz, And I remember finishing the class and just thinking, holy shit, we make amazing Shiraz in this state. And then same thing with Riesling and same thing with Chardonnay and obviously same thing with Semillon. And after when you judge at the New South Wales Wine Awards, you come away going, bloody hell, like we really do make great wine in this state. And I remember the conversation with you because I was trying to think of a way that we could share that experience with other sommeliers and other retailers, because when you see all these wines in a row, you kind of really get blown away by the quality. But I don't reckon people get that opportunity to see, like you as a sommelier, or if you're a retailer, you might see one or two brands from the Hunter that will come in and show you wine, or one or two from Canberra that will come in and show you wine, but you don't get to see a full lineup of Shiraz from the state, or a full lineup of Riesling or Chardonnay or Semillon. And you just, when you do get that opportunity, I'm blown away, I'm sure you are, by just how great the quality is. I remember trying to organise, I was thinking we need to try and organise, big tastings so people can see what we get to see.
Yep. And they are now, New South Association is doing those greater tastings of regions, and it is great to see. And like you said, sometimes you just need to see them in a lineup and go through and think, yep, quality. They've all got their point of difference, but the kind of the level is extremely high.
I was saying to someone, if you think about New South Wales as a region, arguably, and you'd be a pretty good debater to argue against this, but arguably we produce the best Shiraz in the country. You could put your case forward for Chardonnay. You certainly could put your case forward for Semillon. You can put your case forward for Riesling. I mean, Robert Stein, the brand, Jacob just won the best Riesling at the National Wine Show. So it really is. I reckon New South Wales gets a bit of a tough run when it comes to its perception of quality wine, because I would argue we produce the best wine in the country, but anyway.
And you do it so well. I think there's something to be said about our Aussie sensibilities of, it's a bit like, how do I put, like growing up in Australia where we want to get to Europe all the time, and we want to travel, and we haven't even kind of looked in our own back doorstep. And it's not until we go and do a gap year or we travel and then we have a career and then later we go, I'd love to go around Australia in a camper van when I'm retired. And I think that there's always something that's kind of intoxicating for somewhere else. And so I think I thought that too. I wanted to get to other states. I wanted to drink other states. And then I thought, holy crap. And it was part of, your impact in the wine scene that made me think, God, New South Wales, this is my home. This is my local. This is what I want to champion first. I think Australia is incredible in terms of what we produce, but we need to look inward first and see what's around us. And, the last few years have been tough, but that's, enabled people to look around and go, oh, is there a winery? People say to me, is there a winery down in Shoalhaven? And, and you're like, yes, there is. So I think that, like you said, it does get a bit of a bad rap, but for absolutely no reason, because we produce incredible wine.
Yeah. I often think now, just talking about Australia and Australian wine, I'd love to think if we did not have a wine industry in Australia and someone came across from somewhere and said, let's start a wine industry in Australia, I'd love to know what it would look like now. Because back many generations ago, we were arguably looking to Northern Europe as inspiration as to what to plant. And now I reckon it would be we'd be looking at Southern Europe, Spain and Portugal and southern part of Italy. And so it'd be really fascinating if an industry were to start today, what we would be planting. I'd be relatively confident that we wouldn't be growing much Shiraz or Cabernet or Riesling and Chardonnay would probably be the domain of Tasmania only, and Pinot Noir certainly. And so it'd be really fascinating to see what is going to happen in the next 20 or 30 years, because I suspect there's going to be an enormous amount of change, partly driven by you guys, and partly driven by climate change as well, and just consumer preferences. And but it's going to be fascinating to see what Australia looks like in the next 2 or 3 generations.
Yeah, it's very true. So what does the future hold for Nick Spencer wines? I know you've got an amphora range that's done incredibly well, but what's happening for you in the next, few years with your brand?
Well, not much, just because, what we were talking about before, just trying to stay pretty focused on the wines that I'm producing, and just trying to get, like, now that the pandemic's kind of over, just getting out and talking about wines and talking about my wines, and trying to promote New South Wales wines, and but not a huge amount in terms of I do have the one thing that I've been working on for many, many years now, and have finally, will hopefully release this year or next year, is I've made a Chardonnay that is a blend of Tumbarumba, Hunter Valley and Orange, and the idea was kind of spawned out of that, the old Penfolds kind of concept of not worrying about single regions or vineyards or blocks or clones or anything, but just trying to make the best Chardonnay you possibly can, or the best wine you possibly can. So I thought of this. I've been making wines out of Tumbarumba for a really long time, and they're lovely and elegant and really finessed, but they lack power and concentration in most cases. And so I thought, how can we improve on, how can we make a really great Chardonnay out of New South Wales? And then the Hunter Valley arguably makes some of the best Chardonnay in the country, and they're concentrated and powerful, but they probably lack some of the finesse that Tumbarumba has. And then Orange produces these lovely fine-boned acidic Chardonnays, and I thought it all kind of makes sense that those 3 regions could blend together to make a great Chardonnay. So I've put that in bottle, and we'll release it at some stage. But I opened a bottle a couple of nights ago, and it looks pretty nervous and tight, and doesn't look quite ready to go. So I'm unsure when I'll release that. But that was something that I've been wanting to do for a really long time, especially just that. Sometimes it's lovely to think of the romance of single vineyard, single clone, single block, single blah blah blah. But I really like the idea of just putting all of that aside and just trying to make a great wine. So that was what I tried doing with this Chardonnay.
Yeah. I like that you've kind of explained it like that, because I think, you already do that. You do produce great wines from great region that showcase the area. But sometimes it is just fun to go, like you said, to not think about it too much and go, is this just a great drink? Because when we do blind tasting, whatever it means, we go, that's a great Chardonnay. I don't care where it's from or who made it. That's great. And I think that, there's possibilities for that. And because of your light dry reds and medium dry reds, I think that will fit into your brand, but you still have those other regionality examples as well that fit really well. So that sounds really exciting. I'm looking forward to checking it out when it does go to bottle. I was thinking about you the other day, actually, because I watched Jackass Forever. Have you seen the new movie? I was watching it and I was thinking,
in how that...
No, that was a bit of a left turn, but I was watching it thinking, I guarantee that Nick has watched this. This is probably the only other person that I know that probably would have seen the new Jackass Forever, and it was excruciating to watch. Have you seen it?
I actually haven't seen it. No, I have not.
It's right up your alley, Nick.
I must have a look at it. I can imagine Wolsey or someone would have seen it for sure, but no, I haven't watched it. I'll have to have a look.
You've got to do it, because I almost sent you a picture of saying, like, this is painful. What do you think? Painful in a good way. Nick, I ask everybody, if you could only drink 3 boozy drinks for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
Good question. I think just going on that theme of, drinking alcohol with food and that important relationship, I reckon beer is an obvious choice, and beer would certainly be one of them. Wine is an obvious one, and then I reckon sake, because if you've got in your arsenal of 3 alcoholic drinks, if you've got sake, beer, and wine, you can pretty much cover most cuisines in the world. So yeah, it'd probably be sake, beer, and wine.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, yeah, and sake, it just has so much range and depth, and kind of there's a sake for every mood. So I think that sounds pretty good. Well, Nick, it's a pleasure hearing what you're up to and having a chat. Your enthusiasm for our great state is infectious, and I love that about you. Thank you for making the time. Thanks to your wife for moving from Canberra to Sydney to Canberra, and following you wherever your heart leads you. What a woman.
She is. She's an amazing woman. Good on her. At least we got back to Sydney. We were in Canberra for 10 years, but we got back to Sydney. Thank you very much for having me on your show, and congratulations. Firstly, congratulations with your baby that will be born at some stage in the next couple of months, I'd imagine. And also your show as well. It's been fantastic and really good to listen to everyone that you've interviewed, and so it was nice to catch up.
Thanks so much. I think, two babies of mine. One's going to be slightly more problematic than the other. Thank you, Nick. Cheers to you. I hope we get to chat soon.
Thank you.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.